Welcome to the Noble Ape podcast, Ape Reality. I'm Tom Barbalet, and this serves as the January 2009 Mailout. Well, I wanted to start this Ape Reality with some discussion of my personal life and personal situation, and just some sense of what life is like in Las Vegas, Nevada. This in part is inspired by Gerald de Jong's correspondence and various other correspondence that I've received from the biota community about living in Las Vegas particularly. Also, Joe Riem and Robert Rice were recently in town, and neither of them were able to meet with me for kind of diverging reasons. So I was a little disappointed not to be able to catch up with either Joe or Robert, as obviously they've both participated in biota, and Joe as well has been in a kind of semi-frequent correspondence associated with Noble Ape related stuff too. So I missed meeting both of them, not for want of trying on my part, but I think it's just the nature of when folk come to Vegas, they oftentimes have other things that they need to be doing. So as I reported in the last Ape Reality, or an Ape Reality prior to the last one, my wife and I moved into a house. In fact, I'm currently recording Ape Reality from the library in our house, and the economic circumstances in the US and pretty well internationally seem to be relatively deflating currently. I have been able to hold work, although I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute or two. My wife lost her job earlier this month, and yes, I mean, whilst we haven't really needed my wife's income, it does bring into mind the fragility associated with a lot of what we do as software engineers. And in that regard, I've tried to motivate some of the discussions in Biota Live to specifically ask some of the hard questions, because I think unless the hard questions are asked currently, the artificial life community won't be in a stable state to deal with these kind of problems as they continue to come up. Initially, obviously, we had Larry Yeager on, we had Zan Gill last week, and I'm looking forward to talking to Mark Badeau in a week or so's time with regards to a number of artificial life issues. I think the problems currently associated with software engineering in general are pretty well amplified in artificial life, and certainly over the next few months, I will like to explore these when I get back from Australia through not only individual kind of interview chat discussions per Mark Badeau and Zan Gill and Larry Yeager, but also community discussions. So I don't necessarily want to make Biota Live more political in some sense, but I think it's probably just going to happen anyway. As I record this on Thursday, I believe it's the 29th of January, my office was burgled and a computer was stolen. In fact, my primary computer, but thankfully no Noble Ape related stuff was on it. And my feeling is just not that, this was a particularly horrible violation, but this is probably just a sense of things to come. I just feel that this is kind of the start. Obviously, Las Vegas is a particularly extreme case, and my wife and I have benefited greatly from the real estate demise in Las Vegas in order to buy a home relatively cheaply. But nonetheless, it's relatively bleak, and I think kind of dark futurism exists in Las Vegas in particular, which always makes me laugh about the idea of Bris Vegas, which is the term that folks in Australia use to refer to Brisbane. I mean, I think Las Vegas is absolutely nothing like Brisbane. Having spent quality time in Brisbane, and now having spent the past 3 years in Las Vegas, just the effects of local Vegas is probably going to creep more into some of the narration associated with Noble Ape. I'm not sure if the Noble Apes will wander a desert or some of those kind of experiences, but I've always liked the ability for there's almost to be something science fictional about the Noble Apes. I remember Escape from Nirvana was the game where the Noble Apes exist on an island. It's in fact an island in the present day that the US military or some other military complexes have invented. Kind of crack commandos come to the island to try and understand what the Noble Apes are about in a typical kind of militarism fashion in terms of understanding with their guns. This was a video game that was pitched and early development was undertaken back probably in the late 90s. I think there's still a lot in there in terms of philosophy and a potential chapter or novel associated with the Noble Ape development. I think the greatest image from that game development experience was the Noble Ape walking through the streets of Manhattan, which I think comes towards the end, and the sense that the Noble Ape's kind of amongst humanity. But I'll talk more about that as I feel fit, but it is an interesting part of the Noble Ape mythology that I think I may have referenced in a couple of previous Ape Realities, but there have been so many. That's the situation on a personal front. Obviously, my wife and I are going to Australia in March for the first half of March, from the 1st to the 18th in Las Vegas time, and from the 3rd to the 18th in Australia time. Two people I wanted to talk with in particular, Alex Brooks and Darren Bolton. I'm going to be meeting with both of them and just catching up, but hopefully also I'll be able to do some kind of recording with both of them, although that is, subject to their own agreement and interest. There may be other folk that I meet through my trip that may yield recordings. Certainly in Biota Live, Zan Gill sprung on me the potential to interview others in Australia, but really my time is remarkably short. It's going to be 3 cities with a road trip between each, and if folks are familiar with the geography of Australia, the driving between Canberra and Adelaide, not a little drive in the least, so certainly about 4 if not 5 of the days that I'm going to be in Australia are going to be spent road tripping. It's going to be a nice trip in some regard. I'm looking forward to reclaiming my library that has been maintained in Australia over the past decade, as well as catching up with family and a choice selection of friends. So that's going to be happening in March, which will probably cut very heavily into the Ape realities and certainly also Biota Live. However, on the Ape reality front in particular, I hope to have audio recordings that I can put out at the feed following, which will no doubt add some interest from the Australia trip. So I started the year with this idea of the Year of Noble Ape, which is borrowed from Ken Stauffer's Year of A-Life, which was his Evolve 4 program running for a year on a machine. And the Year of Noble Ape related to a command line simulation that FTP'd out data roughly every 4 to 10 minutes. I think I tuned it somewhere in between there. And from running this, if you talk about kind of grandiose names for less grandiose actual output, I think I ran it for about 4 or 5 days. And that generated just a slew of bugs. It was actually quite fascinating to see what was going wrong with regards to the genetics, what was going wrong with regards to the Noble Ape survivability, the uniqueness of the apes that were produced, the kind of genetic toxicity, and also I had forgotten that I had included an age approximation which kind of converted, like, human years to dog years, converted actual time to Noble Ape years in time, which again was a step removed from what the simulation time was spitting out. So I removed that as an obvious bug, particularly when the Noble Apes started surviving into their hundreds in Noble Ape years, even though they were only surviving 30-odd simulated years. I think I'm going to resurrect that. I'd like to do it when I get back from Australia. Obviously I don't want to have something running remotely, particularly something that's running remotely on a hot little iMac within our house, which is now filled with cats as well. Over a period of time when I'm in Australia, I'd like to have some kind of connection with regards to the machine that was running the Year of Noble Ape. I want to shout out to Rudolf Pennikov in the Netherlands, who has offered a machine or two with regards to running this kind of simulation, and really I need to compile a Windows version of this. The FTP command line stuff that's used to access the Noble Ape server I want to keep relatively close, just because it's got login information and things like that, although I can obfuscate that information. So I don't know whether I'll pass them on the full Year of Noble Ape code, but I'm going to make a large portion of that public just because it took me about a day just to hack through the kind of partial information online about how to actually properly set up automated FTP transactions through Apple's shell environment. So that was a lot of additional work that wasn't probably needed, and I think certainly needs to go out in the public domain. So as I mentioned, there were a number of genetics changes, and this led to the release of 0.689, and that primarily also passed out some of the early Cocoa changes as well. So it was an interesting release in terms of passing on a wide variety of different pieces of code, and I don't really know how receptive people were to that. I think the Noble Ape user base has moved quite dramatically, really quite difficult to track in terms of source code, in terms of executable. I don't know whether it's a frequency thing, I don't know whether it's a relevancy thing. I think there needs to probably be greater visualization, or at least some kind of interface into visualization, and to this end I think I'm probably going to reflect on the 14-hour flight to Australia with regards to what I can do specifically in that regard. Certainly the next month is going to be very interesting, and to be honest, my priorities really aren't with regards to Noble Ape over the next month, although I will be doing some Noble Ape stuff, no doubt. My expectation this year was that Apple was going to drop Noble Ape without a Cocoa implementation, and I've heard no news to that effect. The information that I am receiving is that there seems to be no major shift in operating system at Apple over the next year, which for me is something that I hadn't really expected. I fully anticipated that Noble Ape would be dropped by Apple this year if the Cocoa implementation hadn't been written, but I haven't heard anything back from my friends at Apple. I think, maybe I've missed a coup de grace in that regard, but it could be something that comes up in the future, and I need to get a Cocoa implementation out as soon as possible. To this end, this is probably what I'm going to be working on, or at least thinking about, over my time in Australia, and particularly with regards to just refining and implementing the strategy that I've already done in terms of simplifying the interface. Begs the question of how simple the interface needs to be in order for it to be actually fully able to be implemented in Cocoa, but I think the cycling component is there, the graphics component needs a little bit of tuning, tuning, so when it is implemented it will be in a very simple state, and then it'll be a matter just to add the related interface changes that are needed. In this slide also, obviously the Windows and Linux versions are behind too. I don't know, it's going to be an interesting year. I think, I hope that I won't have a lot of excess time to work on Noble Ape. I feel that the circumstances associated with substantial Noble Ape development time would be rather bleak. That being said, I have returned AdSense to the site. When my wife lost her job, I thought this is ridiculous. I need to try to get a little bit more income, at least to pay for the server bills and other things. Really, the feedback I have from that is that AdSense only on the front of the site is all that's needed. The AdSense on the simulation page yields very little. The stuff on the front of the site tends to be from people that have gotten lost and end up on the Noble Ape site anyway. So I think this month I'll pull the stuff off the simulation page. And also, I don't really get a sense of what I Am Darwin is going to be doing this month. I did get a submission today, which I'll need to update on the I Am Darwin website. But that's another project that has got, probably 15 videos associated with it. So, small successes. The videos that have been received have been wonderful. What happens to that site in the foreseeable future? Certainly I'm going to maintain it for at least a year. But I think it could also become a forum for a variety of discussions and ideas to come through. So maybe that's the next maturity of the site, moving it into something which is more a discussion forum or a means of artificial life developers to meet with like-minded folk, people that created I Am Darwin videos fundamentally. So that will be coming in the future too, and probably more of that in a future Ape Reality. You have, in the next month, the possibility of more Ape Reality recordings. I know I did conclude last year with this kind of narration too. However, there are a number of topics that I'd like to discuss in a future Ape Realities, and perhaps the associated side projects relating to Noble Ape, particularly since I'm talking about things like Escape from Nirvana, would be relevant. My wife has commissioned a font of my handwriting. I think I may release a version of the manual for 2009, not only with associated sidebars and sketches from the notebooks that I actually see in front of me, but also potentially written in my own handwriting, which I think would be an added cuteness in some regard. I don't know how bad the font will turn out, but it was a relatively cheap gift, and I think one that I'll utilise as much as possible. I can't imagine the Noble Ape site being redesigned with this particular font, but it'll be interesting to see original Noble Ape documentation back in the original handwriting. So thank you very much for tuning into this podcast. Tom@nobleape.com. If you have any feedback, any criticism, any ideas, I do receive a steady stream of email from folks that have discovered this podcast, and also folks that have discovered the Noble Ape simulation, and really it is one of the greatest rewards that I see currently. It's wonderful to hear from new listeners, new users, and people who've taken the time out to really think about what the Noble Ape simulation is about and how it impacts their own life and potentially can be used for greater purpose. So if you're one of these people that's listening to the podcast for the first time, I encourage you to get in contact, Tom@nobleape.com. I'll certainly respond promptly and probably with a great degree of wit and insight if you do choose to get in contact with me. Also, Facebook. I mean, there's a lot of stuff associated with Noble Ape currently on Facebook. Some of it is accessible through the Ape Reality podcast page, nobleape.com/reality. Some of it's accessible through the Noble Ape simulation page, nobleape.com/sim. And some of it just means getting in contact with me on Facebook. I'm utilising Twitter, although Twitter is more with regards to my kind of day-to-day stuff, like computers getting stolen and things like that. But if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's my surname, Barbale, and I accept all followers. It's quite curious the number of people that find me on Twitter somehow. Thank you very much for tuning into this podcast. Look forward to you tuning into the next podcast.